Hey, this is Sanyam Bhutani, and you're listening to Chai Time Data Science, a podcast for data science enthusiasts where I interview practitioners, researchers, and Kagglers about their journey, experience, and talk all things about data science. Welcome to Chai with the great Kaggle Grandmasters, CTDS Show. In this episode, I interview Beluga, the Beluga from Kaggle World, Kaggle Grandmaster and data scientist at H2O.ai, Gabor Fodor. Gabor has been one of the top ranked competitions Grandmaster, with his rank peaking at 4 worldwide and currently 14. He's been in very active discussions and Kernel's contributor as well, with both ranks peaking at top 10 and top 20 respectively. Personally, I got started in my first competition. I was able to compete in my first competition because of a starter kernel that he created. So this interview really means a lot to me. We, as you expect, dive into his professional journey and his Kaggle journey, how he got started in data science and Kaggle and how he progressed, along with his recent gold finish on the Cornell Birdcall identification competition, where he finished position 10 solo, bringing another gold medal to his profile. We dive into his solution and his approach to the competition. Beluga has been one of the Kaggle legends. I'm sure anyone from Kaggle World would recognize. If you're not from Kaggle World, you will know after this interview. So without further ado, here's the episode. I hope you enjoyed this conversation as much as I did. Hi everyone, I'm honored to be talking to someone thanks to whose kernels I am sure you know I got started on Kaggle, Gabor Fodor, Kaggle Grandmaster and data scientist at H2. Thank you so much for joining me on the podcast.
Thank you very much.
So I want to start by asking the first question because many of us have forgotten what traveling used to be like. I read that you had taken a break sometime in your professional career to travel the world. Can you share what that was like for people who have forgotten what the outside world used to be like?
Yeah, it seems it was ages ago. It was in 2016. And my wife, well, actually my ex-wife right now, but we had the chance to visit 10 different countries in Southeast Asia and Asia for 6 months. So yeah, it's quite different from nowadays. So, but it was really good from Thailand to Japan, Indonesia. And this is the first time I had a chance to visit Asian countries. So it's completely different from what I used to in Europe. So it was a really good experience.
Interesting. Did you visit any country that has any special teas? Did you try any special chai somewhere?
Yeah, we had visited tea plantations in Malaysia. So yeah, definitely. But later, last year, it was also before COVID, I had the chance to visit Beijing for Kaggle days. And right now I'm drinking white tea, I guess, from Beijing.
Okay. I'll definitely...
unfortunately.
I'll ask for your recommendations after the call for good places to visit for tea plantations. But switching gears to your professional journey, how did you get interested in data science? Was being an outstanding math student the secret to your success on Kaggle?
Sorry, could you repeat?
Sorry, yes. So at what point did you get interested in data science, and was being an outstanding mathematics student the secret to your success?
Yeah, it helped a bit, but I met Kaggle and data science during my first university master degree. So I studied mostly theoretical mathematics there and some applied mathematics. And I was looking for a way to shift more into the applied domain because eventually I wanted to get a job. And data science was at that time, actually, it was called data mining, so it wasn't that sexy. But it was a really good option. Other guys from my class looked into finance and similar different directions to have something additional to the core mathematics. And at that time, I guess my first data mining competition wasn't at Kaggle. It was an Australian data mining conference in 2009. And they created a challenge to ensemble the Netflix submissions and try to improve them. And that was the very first time I met with a leaderboard and the experience that you can have an objective evaluation metric for a competition, and it was a really good experience. We weren't that good in that competition, but from that very moment, I tried to improve myself.
Interesting. At what point did you discover Kaggle? You've been active on the platform for I think 8-9 years now. How did you get addicted to it?
Yeah, I guess it's not 9 years ago. So again, for university projects, it was difficult to find useful data sets. And I noticed that time that Kaggle and a few similar platform provided data mining challenges and competitions. And it was a really good way to learn new techniques, apply the techniques I learned at the university, and try to compare them and benchmark them against other people. And also during this semester, I could do something interesting and closer to the real world, I would say. Now I know that even a Kaggle competition could be quite different from a real world, but as a university student, it was much closer.
How was the initial learning curve for you? Because at least I must have been a much worse student, but when I started on Kaggle, there was this huge gap between what I was learning at university versus what was going on Kaggle. How was the curve for you?
It was the same actually. So first I had to learn programming, at least not in a proper way, but at least be able to write scripts or hacking different solutions. So I remember my first Kaggle competition. I used command line libsvms and different graphical user interface tools like RapidMiner or SPSS Clementine at that time. And eventually I ensembled them in Excel. So I had a very long way to improve on that workflow. So then I started to learn R and later Python, and I sticked with Python.
So how did you improve upon this throughout the initial learning? Because you've had some great results even in your first days of competing. How did you improve upon once you got started?
Well, what I really like about Kaggle, and it still stands nowadays, that you can learn a lot during the process from the other competitors as well. So the sharing in the forums and discussions, and nowadays in the notebooks, or previously it was called Kernels, it's amazing. So still in each and every competition, I learn a lot, and it was at that time as well. So learning from previous competition winners, or even learning from other people in the very same competition, what's working, what's not, helps a lot.
Okay. So I have your previous bird identification challenge winning solution open. You use Python 2.7. There was NumPy, Pandas, SciPy, Wave, Matplotlib, and scikit-learn involved on a i5 16GB RAM Windows 7 PC. How was the experience of winning a competition? This was one of your first competitions, if I may, and you had placed first. Any amazing memories from then? Anything you recall?
Yeah, it was a quite different time. So it was 2013, and that competition had 80 participants or 80 teams. So it's completely different than what we have nowadays, that each and every competition you have thousands of people competing against each other. So it was just a summer research competition, and but it was still a very nice problem. They collected audio recordings from an experimental forest in Oregon, and we had to identify bird species in the field recordings. And at that time, in 2013, it was the beginning of the deep learning era, I would say. So AlexNet still existed, but the tools didn't. So a few competitors tried to manually code neural networks in CUDA. I remember Maxim Yakov worked at NVIDIA, and I guess he managed to get into the top 3, but the competition didn't have that much data, so only a few hundred recordings. So it wasn't sufficient, and also the tools weren't sufficient at that time for me to try anything similar to that. So I used much simpler techniques, which has similar concepts. So template matching or template extracting from the spectrograms. And then whenever, like a convolution, when you find a similar correlation with the template from the bird, then you can use it as a feature. And I fed it thousands of, I fed random forest models with thousands of similar template matched features. And yeah, I still have that machine. So.
That was a very interesting competition. I was just combing through for my quote unquote research, and I saw there were no notebooks. And then I realized this was back in the day when no notebooks existed, and people had shared their solutions in MATLAB, which is just amazing looking at what happens today on the forums.
Yeah, also on GitHub, but most of the time the scripts were shared just attached to the discussion
in a zip file.
Yeah.
So another very interesting thing I learned from your profile, you've competed 88% solo across all competitions. Why do you prefer competing solo over in a team?
I don't know, or I don't have a direct answer, but I have probably many different reasons why it could happen. So first probably is that it's easier for me for time management purposes, and also for the learning aspect, to do it on my own, and it forces me to have to figure out every details and have to implement each and every stuff during the competition. But on the other hand, I also enjoy competing in teams. So it happened a few times. Actually, right now, I'm also participating in the lift competition. But we are in the top 10, but actually I haven't done anything. So all the work right now is basically Peter's work. He has spent almost 2 months right now in the competition. So it's also a bit of pressure to me that now I have to catch up. And once you team up with others, you can't really quit the competition. So you have to go for the very end and push it. So I guess it's also it gives you some freedom if you compete solo.
Many people are afraid to jump as beginners solo in a competition. You started competing solo as well. In my research, that's one thing I found. Any tips for working solo? Because many people hit a wall, they can't find more ideas and give up midway.
Well, yeah, it happens from time to time, and you can't win every competition, and you can't even beat the silver or especially the gold in every competition. So you have to accept that. So usually I like to have simpler goals than top finishes or gold medals. So, for example, the last bird competition, I used it to learn PyTorch and or at least have some practice with PyTorch, I would say. So even if you don't have the time or the skills to be top in the competition, you still can have a meaningful experience or you can learn a lot during the competition. So I wouldn't say that it should intimidate you.
So one another thing I learned was you started authoring a lot of kernels as well throughout your journey. You've enjoyed sharing. What's your process of creating these kernels?
Well, it depends. So I have a completely different type of kernel. So probably the most popular ones are benchmark solutions or tutorial like kernels, and they require a completely different approach. So if you want to create a good competition submission like a notebook, then probably you have to start at the very beginning of the competition, and you have to provide a good leaderboard score for others to get some publicity. And from that point, you probably should improve in small iterations and maybe improve the visualizations and write more description to also gain a bit more publicity. But I also like simpler notebooks. I have a few with just a joke and
The gaggle one.
yeah, how to draw an owl. It's basically just a meme and it's still got a gold medal. So yeah, that's the other way. I also like meta Kaggle like analysis when during the competition, or if you have a series of competitions, you could analyze the other competitors' behavior or data. How do they team up? How do they progress against the leaderboard? So that stuff.
Sure. The reason I was turning around was I just wanted to look at your Kaggle profile. I have it open here, and for the audience, just want to point out that when you were active, your rank peaked at 7 in the notebooks, and you're just 3 medals away from becoming a grandmaster there. Also, I'm sure it just speaks for how much the community loves your notebooks.
Thanks.
Do you have any favorite memories? I like to call it battle stories. Any favorite battle stories from any competition or from authoring any kernels for any competition?
Yeah, I have quite a few. I think one of the favorites was the cancer screening competition. It was actually a closed one, so at that time Kaggle had masters only competitions or limited competitions. It was an invitation only experiments. I don't think they still have them nowadays. But we were in a team of 5, and eventually we managed to get into the top 4, and it also meant that we had an invitation to San Francisco, and it was the first time that I had the chance to meet in real life with my teammates, with Ash, with Abhishek, and also with the other participants, Gilbert also. It was a really good memory to visit the Kaggle office and meet this. At that time, it was quite a small team. I guess they are a bit larger now since the Google acquisition, but maybe they had 1,000 people in the office. So it was amazing how they could manage.
I'm sure. Just want to drop a self plug that I've interviewed all of those teammates apart from Ash. Hopefully, Ash as well soon. So if you'd like to check those interviews out, please do.
Yeah, cool.
So I would love to dive into the Cornell Bird competition. That's the title of the competition, Cornell Bird Identification. Can you help us set the stage for what the problem statement was? And also, congratulations on another solo gold on the 10th position.
Yeah. So it was a similar competition for the other bird classification. So again, the test set was collected in forests as field recordings. But the twist was that the training set was a different kind of audio recordings. So lots of people like birds, and they like to spend their free time recording bird songs. So, and they also like to share them with each other. And there are a few sites like Xenocanto, which makes it easier to collaborate on bird songs. You can share your recordings. You can then ask in the forums if you are not sure which bird was in the recording. So it's basically a way to collect the ground truth data for bird song recognition. But in those kind of recordings, usually there is a main single bird species. And in the test set, it's not necessarily true. So it's like a multi-label, multi-class problem. So we had to predict for each 5-second segment of the test recording what birds are in it. It could be that there isn't any, but there could be multiple different species or multiple different birds from the same species singing at the same time. So it's a much more challenging setup than just identifying the main bird from the original training recording.
Interesting.
And that was also this twist that made me interested in the competition. Besides that, I really like problems where it's not that much business-driven problems. So usually at my work, I have to deal with business-driven problems, and it was always the case. And from time to time, I like these fun projects.
So the goal was to identify songs of using audio files, the bird species that is singing the song out in the wild with noise. The leaderboard was stuck for a point, for a score for a long time. Why was this such a challenging problem? Why were Kagglers not able to just crack the leaderboard?
Yeah, the baseline when you predict there isn't any call or any bird in the file had quite a high F1 score, because roughly 30% of the time or the segments didn't have annotated bird calls. So actually that's a really good benchmark, just saying there is no bird at all. And to improve on that, you need a classifier which can identify bird songs in each segment with at least 50% accuracy for that prediction. Otherwise, you will actually lose from the benchmark. So with a different loss metric, I guess it wouldn't be that difficult. But since you had to actually predict the exact class, not the probability of the bird, when you had an error, it could hurt your score. And also the very different training and test set distribution, they had completely different signal to noise ratio. It also made challenging to make a meaningful progression. So even at the end, the best submissions had maybe 20% or 30% of the bird songs correctly, which is still challenging to guess the other 70%, I guess.
So I guess this competition is an outlier, but generally I also love to understand how the best Kagglers experiment. How do they approach problems? What was your experimentation setup, your go-to steps when you joined this competition? Do you have a framework in place? I've learned that many Kagglers have this private repo from which they start and build on top of that.
Yeah, I have some kind of a framework. Probably it could be improved, but I like to use separate Python virtual environments for different competitions, separate GitLab repos. Sometimes I use a Trello board for cards and ideas and stuff like that, but I'm not super organized, so probably it could be improved. But for this competition, uh, outside of Kaggle, actually they have similar birdsong recognition competitions every year. So they had the decade was to differentiate noise and bird songs in general. So it's like a binary classification problem in 2018. And they have the bird CLF competitions series each year. And they also published quite a lot good papers about those competitions, which had similar setup. They actually use the same training set from Xenocanto. Sometimes they use also the same kind of mono recordings for the test set, but they also had some field recording test set experience as well. So it was good to review the techniques. And of course, these competitions are always won by some kind of deep learning convolutional network on the image spectrogram. But different participants had creative ideas how to augment the original files or different architecture. So it was really good to go through the literature and collect ideas from them.
In general, how do you find ideas to add to your solution, or while just experimenting, how do you find these ideas?
Yeah, as I mentioned, I like to search for articles, but also I value the notebooks and the Kaggle discussion forum a lot. So for me, if I see an interesting paper but without code, then probably I won't start from scratch implementing that in PyTorch, because my goal was to actually learn a bit of PyTorch, but not the whole stuff. So when Hidehisha shared his benchmark, which was a bit better than the baseline no call benchmark, but it was really difficult to improve on that. Then I learned that there is another paper, the pre-trained audio neural networks repository, which actually had code, and also they shared the pre-trained weights for their network. So it was a really good and easy way to start. Otherwise, I probably would have way worse results in the end of the competition.
Okay. So you've had amazing results. Definitely, you finished 10th on the leaderboard. It's up in the gold. It's actually a few positions up below the gold line. For people that understand the rankings, the gold zone increases based on the number of competitors. So congratulations again on that. I'd love to dive into your solution. I've read it, and maybe I'd just start by going into different parts. Please feel free to follow any path as you see best. You initially tried looking at bird species while just experimenting. How is this helpful?
Eventually, it wasn't that helpful, but I expected it to have much more benefit, because we had to predict more than 250 different bird species. And we only knew that the recordings were taken somewhere in North America in 3 different locations. And I wanted to figure it out a bit more about these locations, because usually the West Coast and the East Coast had different bird species distribution. So there are a few birds that are common in the West, but not in the East. Also, there are migrating birds, and in general, there are much more common birds, and using this additional knowledge, which isn't necessarily represented in the training set, it could help the models to exclude different species, which is quite unlikely to be in the test set. For example, the white-crowned sparrow was just using that single bird for a submission would place you 10%. It's still way worse than the local benchmark because it's not that common. But I was able to reduce the number of bird species to maybe a dozen, and that was able to capture 70 or 80% of the total bird songs. But it could help if you focus on the more common birds, but eventually it didn't help that much. I used them for different ensemble models. I used higher weights or higher number of recordings for more common birds, but it wasn't as successful as I expected to be.
Okay, makes sense. And I guess this was also because there was some slight class imbalance in this competition, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, and even between the public and the private set, it also had some class imbalance. So there were birds which were only in the private but not in the public. So it was also tricky.
Makes sense. In your solution, as I'm reading it, after that you share the data preparation. So would love to dive into that as well. It says you had resampled everything to 32 kilohertz and broken them into chunks. Why was this required, and other steps that you performed?
Yeah, we knew that the test set had the same sampling rate, while the training set had different sampling rates because different people recorded different with different microphones and maybe phones either. So they had different quality. Also, the sampling rate affects how large frequency you can capture in the spectrogram. So, for example, the previous MLSP competition had 16 kilohertz recordings. Then you cannot go above 8 kilohertz in the spectrogram. And resampling doesn't have that, but at least it allows you to have similar frequencies for the better quality spectrograms. Also, resampling everything, and because the recordings were in a MP3 format, compressing or decompressing them into NumPy arrays took a bit more disk size, but it resulted in faster data loaders. So it improved the training process.
Makes sense. It's also somewhat counterintuitive that I would expect as you increase the sample size, it should by default help the model in general, but that wasn't the case.
It's hard to or difficult to tell what helped and what not, because even at the end of the competition, as I mentioned, most of the top results still wasn't able to capture most of the bird signals in the recordings. So as the training and test set had quite different distributions and quite different signal to noise ratio, it wasn't necessary better to use all the different species and all the different recordings. So I try to focus on the most common birds and also the best best rated recordings.
Okay. And I was pretty interested in this one. I'm just going through step by step in your write up. So for the audience, please feel free to check that out as well from the show notes. The link is there. Uh, can you even add augmentation? And you did add augmentation, so that was interesting. How do you augment sound data, and what augmentations did you use?
I only use the noise, additional noise augmentation, but Mario Lasek had a quite a good paper from the last year BirdSlap competition. So he won that, and he used all sorts of different time domain and frequency domain augmentations. So I would recommend anyone to read that paper because it has much more and much better ideas than I was able to implement. But the general idea is that since the training data set is too clean and they are focusing on the main bird species in the recording, adding some noise like wind or rain or other animal sounds like insects or frogs could help the model to generalize in the unseen test environment where anything could happen. So I tried to collect external data. There are quite a lot noise and bird separation recordings from previous challenges, and use the noise parts to just add to the original signal, and then it also adds some noise to the spectrogram later. So different frequencies, it can be blurred or can we even hit them thanks to that noise. There are also mix-up techniques. I made some experiments with them, and the usual.
Sorry, this is mix-up for audio. Are you referring to converting to spectrogram and then mixing up?
Rather mix-up for the image, so for the spectrogram.
Okay.
Yeah. But yeah.
And I remember there were interesting data sets also being shared in this competition. I remember Vopani had posted the complete XC data set on Kaggle itself.
Yeah, I use that. It helped a lot. It basically doubled the training size.
So would love to know the final model and the blending that was helpful in getting you to the 10th position. If you could give an overview for that, and for the people that want more depth can also read the discussion again as a reminder in the show notes.
Well, I made quite a few experiments from the beginning with converting the spectrogram on a CPU and then loading it to the CNN on a GPU for ResNet 50 and simpler models. But eventually, I stick with the pre-trained audio network framework. It has a bit different architecture than what we used to for ImageNet. So it has CNN 14, but the idea is the same. So have lots of convolutional layers on the spectrogram. The additional benefit was that it used the Torch libRosa package, and that way you could use the input audio file and let the GPU convert the spectrogram as well. So it also made the data loader faster. So you have the input audio signal in 5-second chunks. You have the labels, what bird is in that label. You can add different bird species, and you can mix up different audio samples. You can add noise and then feed the convolutional network. So that was the basic idea. I tried to make a few experiments to improve the original architecture, but the only thing it was helpful to increase the frequency bins from 64 to 128. The other experiments failed after a day or so. So it was also tricky because I don't have GPU, so I had to rent it from the cloud, and the iteration cycle for experiments was a bit short, a bit longer than I used to, or at least what I would prefer.
Okay. Um, so after the competition ended, it was a challenging competition. Did you learn any new tricks or any new ideas after going through the discussions? Any things that would have pushed you to the top? Because this is also a common theme that one little trick could have really boosted your position. Was there anything at all like so?
Uh, Probably better noise augmentation would help. So I only used natural noises from different recordings, but others had better experiments with artificial generated noise, pink noise, brown noise. So I didn't try it after the competition. Usually I drop the topic after the competition, so, and I jump to a new competition or to a different problem. But probably that helped.
Okay. Congratulations again on the 10th position finish. This is my favorite question as well for the best Kagglers, which is how has Kaggle helped you in your professional journey? I read that both almost started in parallel and you've worked across similar problems on and off Kaggle, churn prediction, forecasting problems, image related problems, social media related problems in data science. Was Kaggle helpful in any part of this journey?
Definitely, and I think in both ways. So also for the interviews or how to get the job, it's usually it's a good talking point during the interview process, and like any other side project, I guess. So that's one for sure, and the other is that during these competitions, I could learn a lot, and not necessary the same real world kind of knowledge you would require at a regular data science job, but it also teaches you to how to get a really good baseline model fast. So usually you don't have the time or luxury to improve the fourth decimal in your day job for your model. But on the other hand, before you even start thinking about the problem, you have probably quite a few idea and the experience how to get a quick baseline solution in a day or so. So in that sense, I guess Kaggle experience also helps in any data science job.
Mhm. Coming to your current role, which is you're a data scientist at H2O, what problems are you working on, and what challenges are you solving right now?
Well, it's yeah, I joined the H2 in August, so it's still a learning process. So on one half of the time, I would say I'm working on POCs with prospects or existing customers, mostly focusing on driverless AI, the main product of H2O. On the other part, I'm try to create applications with Wave. I guess that's the term now. So, and for example, from the bird species recognition competition, I created just a fun app where you could upload your North American bird recordings if you have any, and it would try to figure out the species during that recording. But it was really just a demo application to learn the aspects of Wave, which is similar to Dash or Shiny I used before.
Okay. Um, so for the audience, you can check out again Wave from the show notes. Earlier it was called Q. So if you've heard about Q on the podcast earlier, now it's Wave. Um, Coming to the final question, which is also a repeat question, what's your best advice to someone who's just starting out in their data science journey?
I think it would be don't afraid to start. So the worst thing that could happen is that you learn a lot. So even if you can't beat immediately the top of the leaderboard, then you will learn a lot during the process. So I guess having strict goals and maybe additional time management, which I could have done also better, would be my advice. So if you have strict goals, and because it can be quite addictive, or quite in the beginning, you might find that you are spending way too much time on Kaggle. So that's another risk, but if you can manage that, I guess you would be fine.
Okay. I'd like to debunk one myth that I've had. What's the secret to you using the name Beluga on Kaggle, which is also the profile picture for you on Kaggle?
Yeah, I get that question a lot. So it was an internal joke. I'm not sure how funny is that, but when I worked at Telenor, telco company in Hungary, they wanted to assess the company brand image, and they hired an external firm to do that. And they came to a conclusion that the company is like a beluga, a slow, nice, dummy animal, and they suggested us to be more aggressive, like an orca or a killer whale. So, and we had quite a few jokes at that time. So, and then it stinged. So.
Okay, I was always curious about your profile picture. I remember it since my first competition. But thank you again for joining me on the podcast. And before we end the call, for the audience, where can they connect with you, or on any platform wherever you're active?
Probably Kaggle and LinkedIn is the easiest. I recently started Twitter, but I'm not sure how much will I use it, but you could try that as well.
Okay, please connect with Gabor on all platforms. Send him a tea emoji so that he knows you coming from Chai Time Data Science. Gabor, thank you so much again for joining me on the podcast and for creating your kernel that got me started on Kaggle.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode. If you enjoyed the show, please be sure to give it a review, or feel free to shoot me a message. You can find all of the social media links in the description. If you like the show, please subscribe and tune in each week to Chai Time Data Science.